You were never meant to pour from an empty cup. You were meant to become the ocean. Stop scrolling. Seriously, stop right there. What you're about to read is going to challenge something you've believed your entire life. Something your parents told you. Something your teachers reinforced. Something your culture has been whispering into your ear since the moment you were born. And here's the uncomfortable part. That belief has been quietly stealing your life. Not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, steadily, and invisibly, like a leak in the foundation of a house. By the time you notice the damage, entire rooms have collapsed. This book is about rebuilding that foundation. From the ground up, the right way. If you're ready to stop living for everyone else and finally start living for yourself, without guilt, without apology, and without hesitation, then keep reading. Your transformation starts right now. The lie that's been running your life. What if the single greatest lie ever sold to humanity wasn't about money, politics, or religion? What if it was something far more personal? What if the biggest deception ever pulled on you was the idea that focusing on yourself is selfish? Think about that for a moment. From the time you were old enough to understand language, you were handed a script that said, good people sacrifice. Good people give. Good people put everyone else first, last, and always. And if you dare to prioritize your own needs, your own goals, your own growth, well, that makes you selfish, narcissistic, a bad person. And you believed it. Most people do. Because it sounds noble. It sounds virtuous. It feels right in that program's conditioned kind of way. But here's the brutal, unfiltered truth that nobody in your life may have ever had the courage to tell you. That script is destroying you. Not maybe, not sometimes. Every single day you operate from that script, you are. Draining your energy into relationships and obligations that give nothing back. Shrinking yourself so others feel more comfortable in your presence. Living a life built around other people's expectations instead of your own authentic desires. And slowly, painfully, dying on the inside while appearing perfectly fine on the outside. You cannot give what you don't possess. You cannot guide others to a destination you've never reached. You cannot radiate confidence you haven't cultivated. You cannot create genuine abundance for the people around you while living in a state of internal scarcity. And you absolutely cannot love anyone else fully. Not really, not deeply. Until you've learned to value yourself first. This book is going to dismantle every limiting belief you carry about self-focus. It's going to show you, chapter by chapter, why the most fulfilled, most successful, and most genuinely generous people on the planet are the ones who are fiercely, unapologetically focused on themselves first. Not because they're selfish, because they've discovered a principle that most people will never understand. When you become the best version of yourself, everyone around you wins. When you master yourself, you automatically elevate everyone in your world. When you invest in yourself with intention and purpose, you don't become less valuable to others. You become exponentially more valuable. By the time you finish this book, you will understand why self-focus is not just acceptable. It is mandatory for anyone serious about living an extraordinary life. You'll have a clear, actionable framework for prioritizing yourself without guilt. You'll know how to build unshakable confidence from the inside out. And you'll understand how to create a life so authentically compelling that opportunities, meaningful relationships, and real success are drawn to you naturally. This is not about becoming cold, selfish, or self-absorbed. This is about becoming self-aware, self-directed, and self-empowered. So you can show up as the most powerful, most alive version of yourself in every area of your life. Let's begin. The self-sacrifice trap. Why being too giving is quietly killing you. Let me ask you something that might make you uncomfortable. How much of your life is actually yours? Not in a legal sense, not in a philosophical sense. I mean practically, moment to moment. How much of what you do on any given day is driven by what you genuinely want versus what you've decided others expect from you? How much of your mental energy is spent managing other people's emotions, solving other people's problems, and showing up for everyone except yourself? If you answer that question honestly, the number is probably shocking. Most people, and I mean the overwhelming majority, are sleepwalking through their own lives. They wake up, react to the world's demands, pour themselves into everyone else's needs, and collapse into bed at night, wondering why they feel hollow, why nothing feels like theirs, why there's this persistent ache of a life unlived sitting right in the center of their chest. This is what I call the self-sacrifice trap, and it's one of the most sophisticated, most socially acceptable forms of self-destruction ever invented. Here's how it works. From the earliest age, the message is constant and clear. Good people give. They sacrifice. They yield. They put the needs of others above their own. And in exchange for this constant self-denial, they receive something that feels like worth, like approval, like love. So you learn to say yes when your whole body wants to say no. You learn to shrink, to take up less space, make less noise, want less, so that everyone around you can feel more comfortable. You make yourself useful, endlessly, exhaustingly useful. And somewhere along the way, you confuse your usefulness with your worth. That's the trap snapping shut. Because here's what nobody ever tells you about this pattern. It doesn't make you a better person. It makes you a weaker one. It doesn't make you more valuable to the people around you. It makes you less valuable to them and to yourself. When you're constantly running on empty, the energy you're giving away is low quality. You're handing people the scraps of a person who's never had a real chance to develop their potential. And worse, you're teaching everyone around you, including the people you love most, that self-neglect is normal, that dreams are something you put aside, that the highest goal in life is to make yourself convenient for other people. Think about the people who've genuinely inspired you, the ones who've changed how you think, how you see yourself, what you believe is possible. Were they the people who gave until they had nothing left and lived quietly resentful lives? Or were they people who had mastered themselves, who lived with purpose, who had built something real, who radiated the energy of someone who chose their life on purpose? You know the answer. You are not inspired by martyrs. You are inspired by masters. The self-sacrifice trap also has a darker, less visible side. It breeds codependency. When your entire sense of worth is built around being needed, you unconsciously start requiring others to need you. You enable dependence rather than growth. You build relationships that function on imbalance rather than mutual respect. This isn't love. This is a transaction dressed up as virtue. And here's the most dangerous consequence of the self-sacrifice trap. It prevents you from ever discovering what you're actually capable of. When your attention is permanently divided among other people's emergencies, you never develop the sustained focus necessary to explore your own potential, your gifts, your curiosity, your unique capacity to create something meaningful. You become a maintenance worker for other people's lives instead of the architect of your own. Breaking free starts with a single radical realization. True service is not about constant availability. True service is about becoming so developed, so skilled, and so genuinely fulfilled that your presence alone elevates every room you walk into. The most generous thing you can do for the people you love is to become the most powerful version of yourself. When you invest in your own growth, you give everyone around you permission, even encouragement, to do the same. You stop being a crutch. You become an example, and examples change lives in ways that crutches never can. Energy economics, the invisible currency that determines your entire life. Here is a truth that will reorganize how you see everything. You are not running out of time. You are running out of energy. Time is equal. Every person on the planet gets 24 hours. But energy? Energy is personal. It's biological, psychological, emotional, and spiritual. And how you manage it will determine the quality of literally every single experience in your life. Most people treat energy like it's infinite. They say yes to every request, take on every obligation, engage with every drain, and then wonder why they feel like they're constantly moving but never actually arriving anywhere. They're not lazy. They're not weak. They're bankrupt. Energy economics is the framework that changes everything. Here's the core principle. You have a finite amount of mental, emotional, and physical energy available each day. Every conversation you engage in, every decision you make, every relationship you invest in, every task you complete, all of it draws from that account. And just like a financial account, if you spend more than you generate, if you operate in consistent deficit, you will eventually collapse, mentally, emotionally, and physically. The difference between energy and money: you can borrow money. You cannot borrow energy. When it's gone, it's gone. And the interest you pay for ignoring this truth is paid in the most precious currency imaginable: your actual life. Let me walk you through what chronic energy mismanagement looks like in practice. You start every day already depleted because you haven't recovered properly. You say yes to requests that drain you because you've never been taught to evaluate opportunities based on their energetic return. You maintain relationships where you're consistently giving far more than you're receiving because no one ever told you that relationships, like any investment, need to generate a return for both parties to be sustainable. The result is predictable: chronic exhaustion, low-grade resentment, and a life operating at a fraction of its potential. You're reactive instead of creative, responsive instead of generative, perpetually managing problems instead of building anything that matters. Your work suffers because you don't have the cognitive bandwidth to perform at your highest level. Your relationships suffer because you're giving from depletion rather than abundance. Your health suffers because you don't have the energy to maintain the habits that would actually restore you. But here's where it flips. When you start treating your energy as the most precious resource you possess, your entire reality shifts. You stop being a victim of your calendar and start becoming the architect of your experience. You learn to invest your energy strategically in activities, relationships, and pursuits that multiply it rather than drain it. The first step is developing energy awareness. Most people have no idea what actually charges them versus what depletes them. They've been on autopilot for so long that they've never stopped to notice the patterns. But once you start paying attention, once you start observing how different activities, people, and environments affect your internal state, those patterns become impossible to ignore. High-energy activities tend to align with your natural strengths, your genuine interests, and your deepest values. They challenge you in ways that feel engaging rather than crushing. They don't feel like work, even when they require serious effort, because they're expressions of who you actually are, rather than performances for who others want you to be. Low-energy activities are the opposite. They require you to suppress your authentic personality, work against your natural wiring, or contribute to outcomes you don't actually care about. They feel like work even when they're technically simple, because they demand you be someone you're not. The same principle applies to people. High-energy relationships are built on mutual growth, genuine appreciation, authentic presence, and reciprocal investment. You feel more like yourself around these people, not less. Low-energy relationships require constant emotional management, give you less than they take, and quietly demand that you suppress parts of yourself just to maintain the connection. You leave these interactions feeling smaller than when you arrived. Once you can clearly identify the difference, you can make strategic decisions about where your energy goes. The highest performing people in any field have mastered this intuitively. They protect their energy with the same seriousness that most people only apply to their bank accounts. They're selective. They're deliberate. They're ruthless about eliminating drains and disciplined about investing in what compounds. And here's the beautiful irony. Focusing on yourself first, protecting your energy, honoring your boundaries, investing in your restoration is not selfish. It's the only sustainable way to have anything real to offer anyone else. Master your energy, and you shift from survival mode to creation mode. You have the mental clarity to think strategically instead of just reacting. The emotional reserves to build meaningful connections instead of just managing crises. The physical vitality to pursue challenging goals instead of just making it through each day. You become a source of energy for others instead of a drain on theirs. The magnetic pull. How authentic growth attracts everything you want. There's a phenomenon that happens when you genuinely commit to developing yourself, and most people never experience it because they never actually do the work. I call it the magnetic effect. It's the reason some people seem to effortlessly attract exceptional opportunities, extraordinary relationships, and consistent success, while others grind relentlessly and still feel like they're pushing against an invisible wall. The magnetic effect is what happens when you become so authentically aligned with who you actually are, so genuinely skilled at what you do, and so clear about your values and direction, that the right things are naturally drawn towards you. Without manipulation, without desperation, without performing for anyone. Most people have this process completely backwards. They believe that to get what they want, they have to chase it. They have to prove their worth constantly. They have to convince people to like them, persuade others to give them opportunities, and endlessly demonstrate their value. So they spend their lives in exhausting pursuit, chasing approval, performing identities that aren't theirs, accumulating external achievements that often feel hollow when they arrive. But the magnetic effect runs in the opposite direction. When you focus intensely on becoming the most skilled, most confident, most authentically you version of yourself, when you develop real expertise in areas that genuinely captivate you, when you build deep self-respect from the inside rather than borrowing it from external approval, you create a gravitational pull, not metaphorically, literally. People are drawn to individuals who have done the inner work because it's so extraordinarily rare. Think about it. Most people are lost. They're not clear on what they want. They haven't identified what they actually value. They haven't developed their unique gifts, and so they move through the world constantly searching outside themselves for direction, meaning, and reassurance. When they encounter someone who has done the real work, someone who is genuinely self-directed, genuinely confident, genuinely present, they feel it immediately. That energy is magnetic because it represents something they desperately want, but don't know how to create for themselves. The magnetic effect isn't about being perfect. It's not about projecting some curated image of success. It's about authenticity. And authenticity is magnetic, precisely because it's so rare in a world where almost everyone is performing. When you are genuinely yourself, imperfections included, journey visible, no performance required, you give everyone around you permission to do the same. That creates trust. And trust creates connection at a depth that performance never can. The magnetic effect also works because people who invest in themselves become problem solvers rather than problem creators. When you prioritize your emotional intelligence, your communication, your self-awareness, and your technical skills, you bring value to every situation you enter. You're not generating drama. You're not requiring emotional management from others. You're the person in the room who adds energy rather than consuming it. That makes you invaluable in every context, in every relationship. But here's the critical distinction that most people miss. The magnetic effect only activates when your self-development is genuine, rather than strategic. If you're developing yourself primarily to impress others, to attract a specific outcome, or to win someone's approval, people sense the inauthenticity. The neediness underneath the polish is palpable, and neediness repels the very things you're trying to attract. True magnetism comes from developing yourself because you're genuinely, unconditionally committed to becoming the fullest expression of your potential. Not to get something, because it's who you are. Building this authentic magnetism requires 4 pillars. First, real self-respect. Not the kind that comes from achievements or compliments. The kind that's earned by consistently following through on commitments to yourself. Especially when no one is watching. Especially when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it would be easier to let yourself off the hook. Second, genuine competence. Identify the areas that naturally fascinate you and then build real expertise through deliberate, sustained practice. Competence creates confidence, and confidence is magnetic because it's earned, not borrowed. Third, emotional mastery. Learn to remain grounded under pressure. Process your emotions without being hijacked by them. Communicate clearly in difficult moments. Maintain a forward-looking orientation even when circumstances are challenging. Most people are constantly looking for others to regulate their emotional state. Someone who has mastered their own becomes profoundly attractive by contrast. Fourth, crystal clarity. Know what you value. Know where you're going. Know why you're making the choices you're making. Clarity is magnetic because most people are perpetually confused, and decisiveness in a world of hesitation is genuinely rare. When these 4 elements combine, you create a presence that naturally elevates every environment you enter. You stop needing to chase because the right things start finding you. And the compound interest on this investment is extraordinary. The more genuinely you develop yourself, the higher the quality of the people and opportunities you attract, which in turn creates even more resources for continued growth. An upward spiral that compounds over months and years into a life that would have seemed impossible when you first started. The mastery mindset, how legends think differently about everything. Let me tell you the real difference between people who achieve extraordinary things and everyone else. It's not talent. It's not luck. It's not connections, timing, or circumstance. It's their relationship with mastery. While most people move through life as consumers, always focused on what they can get, what they can acquire, what they can be given, the truly exceptional approach, life as creators, always focused on what they can become, what they can build, what they can contribute. The mastery mindset is built on a principle so simple it's almost unsettling. You are either growing or you are declining. There is no neutral gear. Every single day, without exception, you are either expanding your capabilities, deepening your awareness, and moving closer to your potential, or you are stagnating and slowly shrinking. Most people choose stagnation because growth requires effort, discomfort, and the willingness to sit with uncertainty. But legends choose growth every time. Not because growth is always comfortable, it rarely is, but because they understand something that average people never quite grasp. The pain of growth is temporary. The pain of regret is permanent. Here's what separates the mastery mindset from the average mindset in practice. Average people want to be good enough. They want to reach a level of competence that feels safe, then coast. They see learning and development as a means to an end, something you do until you arrive somewhere comfortable. And then you stop because you've made it. The mastery mindset sees learning and development as the journey itself. There is no arriving. There is only deepening, expanding, refining. People with a mastery mindset are not trying to reach a destination where they can finally relax. They're committed to a lifelong process of evolution because they understand that growth is the point. The mastery mindset also fundamentally reframes failure. Average people experience failure as evidence of inadequacy. It confirms their worst fears about themselves and becomes justification for retreat. Lower your standards, play it safer, want less. People with a mastery mindset experience failure as data. Failure isn't the opposite of success. It's a component of success. Every failure contains specific, valuable information about what didn't work, which systematically narrows the path toward what will. They fail more frequently than average people because they attempt more. They push boundaries others avoid. They operate at the edge of their capabilities by choice. And this willingness to fail, deliberately without shame, is one of the most powerful advantages any person can possess. The mastery mindset is also characterized by what researchers call intrinsic motivation, being driven by the inherent satisfaction of improvement itself rather than by external rewards. External motivation, money, recognition, status, approval, creates a dangerous dependency. It ties your drive to factors outside your control. The moment those external rewards disappear or diminish, the motivation collapses with them. But intrinsic motivation, the deep satisfaction of getting better, of solving complex problems, of expressing your unique capabilities, cannot be taken away by changing circumstances. When you're motivated by mastery itself, you find genuine satisfaction in small improvements. You don't need to wait for major achievements or public recognition to feel successful because you measure success by your commitment to the process rather than by specific outcomes. This creates sustainability that external motivation simply cannot replicate. The mastery mindset also transforms your relationship with other people's success. Average people experience other people's success as a threat, evidence that the pie is finite and someone else got their slice. This breeds comparison, resentment, and the quiet misery of measuring yourself against others. People with a mastery mindset experience other people's success as information and inspiration. They study exceptional people, not to compete with them, but to learn from them. They understand that mastery is not a limited resource. One person's excellence expands the possibility for everyone, and this shift from competition to inspiration changes everything about the quality of relationships and opportunities that become available. The researcher Carol Dweck called the foundational version of this a growth mindset, the belief that abilities can be developed rather than fixed. But the mastery mindset goes further. It's not just about believing you can improve. It's about being obsessed with improvement, making growth the central organizing principle of your entire existence. It's about asking yourself every single day, how can I be better today than I was yesterday? What can I learn from this? Where is the next level? And what does it require? People with a mastery mindset also deeply understand the compound effect of small, consistent improvements. They don't require dramatic transformations. They focus on getting marginally better every day, trusting that those marginal improvements will compound over months and years into results that appear miraculous from the outside. They are patient with the timeline, but urgent about daily action. When you adopt the mastery mindset, focusing on yourself stops being self-indulgent and starts being strategic, even obligatory. You understand that your commitment to your own development is the greatest service you can provide to the world, because the more capable, aware, and excellent you become, the more value you can generate for everyone whose life you touch. You stop apologizing for prioritizing your growth. You start recognizing it as a responsibility. The boundary architecture. Protecting your energy like your life depends on it. One of the most misunderstood concepts in personal development is boundaries. Most people think of them as walls, barriers, cold defensive structures built to keep others out. They believe setting boundaries will damage their relationships, make them seem difficult, or mark them as someone who doesn't care. This is completely backwards. Boundaries are not walls. They are gates, and you control who and what gets through. A boundary is simply a clear, conscious declaration of what you will and won't invest your time and energy in. It's not about controlling other people. It's about controlling your own choices, where you direct your attention, what behavior you'll engage with, what conditions must be present for you to give your best. Without a clear boundary architecture, your life becomes reactive by default. You become a product of other people's priorities rather than a creator of your own. Every random request, emotional demand, and external expectation has equal access to your most precious resources, and nothing extraordinary is ever built under those conditions. Here's why boundaries are actually the foundation of genuine, healthy relationships rather than the enemy of them. When you don't have clear boundaries, there is no authentic yes. Every yes you give is contaminated by obligation, fear, or habit. The people receiving that yes know, consciously or not, that it doesn't mean much because you would have said yes to almost anything. But when you have real boundaries, your yes becomes one of the most valuable gifts you can give someone because they know it's a genuine choice, that you could have said no, that you've said no to plenty of other things, and that your yes means they actually matter to you. Boundaries elevate the quality of every relationship by ensuring every exchange is based on authentic choice rather than compulsive accommodation. Building an effective boundary architecture requires 4 interconnected elements. Element 1. Personal standards. These are the non-negotiable principles that govern how you allow yourself to be treated, not what others must do. That's beyond your control. What you will and won't engage with. What conditions need to be present for you to invest your energy in something. For example, you don't participate in conversations designed to manipulate or blame. You don't invest in relationships that consistently take without reciprocating. You don't commit to projects that contradict your core values. These aren't rules for others. They're standards for you. Element 2. Clear priorities. Most people say yes to things they don't actually want to do because they've never taken the time to clarify what they genuinely want to focus on. When your priorities are crystallized, decision-making becomes almost effortless. You can evaluate any request, opportunity, or obligation against your stated priorities and respond accordingly. No elaborate analysis required. If it doesn't align, the answer is no. Element 3. Skillful communication. Boundaries you can't communicate don't exist. They're just resentments waiting to happen. This means learning to say no, clearly, directly, without excessive explanation or apology. It means expressing your needs with confidence rather than guilt. It means navigating conflict not as a catastrophe to avoid, but as a normal part of any authentic human relationship. Most people struggle with this because they've been conditioned to believe that disappointing others is one of the worst things they can do. But the truth is, learning to disappoint gracefully is one of the most important social skills any person can develop. Element 4. Consistent enforcement. This is where most boundary attempts collapse. A boundary communicated but never enforced is not a boundary. It's a suggestion. And every time you fail to follow through on a communicated limit, you teach the people around you that your boundaries are negotiable, that with enough pressure or persistence, they can be moved. Consistent enforcement isn't about being punitive. It's simply about being reliable to yourself and to others. When you say something has a consequence, the consequence happens. Every time. The results of a well-constructed boundary architecture are transformative. You stop feeling powerless over your own schedule. You attract higher quality relationships because people who don't respect your standards naturally self-select out. You have dramatically more energy available for the things that genuinely matter to you. And your self-respect deepens in direct proportion to how consistently you honor your own needs over others' comfort. Your boundary architecture is your declaration to the world about what you're worth. Build it deliberately, maintain it consistently, and watch the quality of every area of your life rise to meet it. Vision. Clarity. The internal compass that makes every decision easier. Most people are making their most important life decisions using someone else's map. They're pursuing success as defined by their parents' generation, chasing happiness as described by social media, measuring themselves against benchmarks they never consciously chose, living inside a story that was written for them before they were old enough to pick up the pen. This is why so many technically successful people are deeply unfulfilled. They've climbed the ladder, reached the destination, collected the markers of achievement, and found nothing waiting at the top that actually resonates with who they really are. Vision clarity is the antidote, but it's not what most people think it is. Most people confuse vision with goal setting. Goals are tactical, specific, measurable outcomes you want to achieve. Vision is something deeper. Vision is identity. It's getting crystal clear on who you are at your core, what you genuinely value most, what kind of contribution feels meaningful to you, and what a life you'd be genuinely proud of actually looks like. This is not about what you think you should want, not about what would impress people at a dinner party, not about what society has decided constitutes a worthy life. This is about stripping away all of that conditioning and finding what actually resonates. The authentic you, underneath all the performance. Here's why this matters so profoundly. When you have genuine vision clarity, you have an internal compass that works in every situation. You don't need external validation to know whether you're on the right track. You don't need other people to tell you what's important. You don't need to constantly benchmark yourself against others' accomplishments because you're measuring your progress against your own vision rather than someone else's highlight reel. Vision clarity also creates what psychologists call cognitive consistency, the experience of internal harmony that comes when your actions align with your deepest values. When your actions contradict your vision, You feel it as internal friction, anxiety, or a persistent sense that something is off. This internal feedback system, once calibrated to your authentic values, becomes the most reliable guidance system you'll ever possess. Developing genuine vision clarity requires what I call values archaeology. Most people believe they know what they value until they look at the evidence. Look at how you actually spend your time, what you actually get energized by, what you find yourself thinking about when no one is telling you what to think about, what you've consistently prioritized with your real choices rather than your stated intentions. Your authentic values are visible in your behaviors and emotional responses, not in your intellectual beliefs about who you should be. Once you've uncovered your authentic values, the next step is future self-visualization. Spend real time imagining yourself 5, 10, or 20 years from now, having fully lived into those values, having developed your potential, having made the choices your best self would make. What does that version of you look like? How do they think? How do they respond to challenge? What have they built? What do their relationships feel like? What does an ordinary Tuesday in their life look like? The more vivid and detailed this vision, the more powerfully it can guide your present decisions. The third component is purpose identification. Understanding what kind of contribution feels genuinely meaningful to you, regardless of how it looks to anyone else. This doesn't require a grand, world-changing mission. It might be raising children who grow into deeply confident, capable adults. It might be building a business that solves a problem you care about. It might be developing profound mastery in a field that genuinely fascinates you. It might be creating something, art, community, knowledge, that enriches the lives of others. The criterion is simple. Does it feel meaningful and authentic to you? Not impressive. Not respectable. Meaningful. When you synthesize your authentic values, your future self-vision, and your sense of purpose, you create what I call a personal constitution, a clear, written articulation of who you are, what you stand for, what you're building, and how you want to show up in the world. This constitution becomes your decision-making infrastructure. When opportunities arise, you evaluate them against it. When challenges occur, you respond from it. When the noise gets loud and everyone has an opinion about what you should do, you return to it. The most effective, most consistently excellent people in any field have extraordinary clarity about their vision and values. This clarity is not incidental to their success. It is their success. It allows them to move quickly, decide confidently, and invest their energy with the kind of focused intensity that creates real results in the real world. Clarity is not a luxury. It is the foundation upon which everything meaningful is built. Environment. Detox. The people who are quietly holding you back here is an uncomfortable truth that your continued growth requires you to face. Some of the people currently in your life are not neutral bystanders to your development. They are active obstacles to it. Not always intentionally, not always consciously, but the impact is the same, regardless of intent. Your environment, and specifically the people who populate it most, has a more powerful influence on your trajectory than almost any other factor. You become, with disturbing reliability, a composite of the people you spend the most time with. Their standards become your reference point. Their beliefs shape what feels normal and possible. Their energy either expands or contracts your own. This is not opinion. It's behavioral science. So here's the question you need to answer honestly. Are the people you're spending the most time with expanding or contracting your sense of what's possible? After time with the core people in your life, do you feel more alive or more depleted? more excited about your future or more resigned to your limitations, more inspired to take action or more comfortable making excuses. Because here's the reality. If you're constantly surrounded by people who normalize complaint without action, who mock ambition as arrogance, who discourage risk as foolishness, and who bond over shared cynicism, you will absorb those patterns. Not because you're weak, because you're human. And humans are wired, deeply and evolutionarily, to conform to their social environment. The specific forms of toxic influence are worth recognizing. There's the chronic negativist, the friend who always has a problem and never wants a solution, who sees the obstacle in every opportunity and treats pessimism as wisdom. There's the threatened family member, the person who loves you and also cannot celebrate your growth because your expansion highlights the life they chose not to build. There's the comfort zone enforcer, the social group that bonds over making fun of ambition, that treats trying as naive and succeeding as suspicious. There's the subtle underminer, the partner or close colleague whose concern about your goals is really just anxiety about how your growth might disrupt the current dynamic. None of these people are necessarily bad. They're operating from their own fears, their own limitations, their own unexamined beliefs. But the impact on your trajectory is real, and pretending otherwise won't protect you from it. The assessment process begins with honest observation. After spending significant time with the most frequent people in your life, track the patterns. Do you leave these interactions feeling expanded or contracted? Do you find yourself thinking bigger or smaller? Do you feel supported in your authentic direction or pressured toward familiarity and comfort? This data is not about judging people. It's about understanding your environment clearly enough to make conscious choices about what you're being shaped by. The detox process doesn't always require dramatic endings. Sometimes it means gradually investing less time and energy in relationships that consistently diminish you. Sometimes it means changing the nature of your interactions, refusing to participate in complaint sessions, redirecting conversations toward solutions, declining invitations to events that exist primarily to reinforce limitation. Sometimes it does mean ending relationships that have become actively corrosive to your development. But perhaps most importantly, it means creating space for new influences to enter. When you stop filling your time with relationships that drain you, you create room for something better. You discover communities built around growth rather than stagnation. You find mentors, formal and informal, whose examples expand your understanding of what's achievable. You attract peers who are also doing real work, pursuing real goals, and who genuinely celebrate your success because it reflects the values they share. The people who belong in your life at your next level are those who inspire you to be better, challenge you productively, and celebrate your wins without resentment. They have their own ambitions. They're doing their own work. Your growth doesn't threaten them. It energizes them. That's the community worth building. And it starts with the courage to honestly assess what you're currently surrounded by, and the conviction that you deserve better. Unshakable confidence. Building the real thing from the inside out. Here's what nobody tells you about confidence. The kind most people are desperately chasing is not real confidence. It's ego validation. And it's one of the most unstable, unreliable psychological states in human experience. Ego validation is the feeling of confidence that comes from comparing favorably to others, from accumulating external achievements, from receiving recognition, approval, and admiration from the people around you. It feels like confidence. It looks like confidence, but it has a fatal flaw. It depends entirely on factors you cannot control. The moment you face serious criticism, significant failure, or someone who seems more capable than you, it evaporates completely, leaving you more fragile than before, because now you've had a taste of what you're missing and don't know how to recreate it without external permission. This is the confidence cycle that keeps most people permanently stuck. Real confidence is built from entirely different materials. Real confidence is not a feeling. It is a track record. It's the accumulated evidence, built through your own experience, that you can trust yourself to handle challenges, to follow through on commitments, to learn from failure and keep moving, to stay true to your values when the pressure to abandon them is real. Real confidence comes from knowing in your bones that whatever happens externally, you have the internal resources to respond effectively. And it's built through what I call self-trust deposits. Every time you make a commitment to yourself, any commitment, and you follow through on it, you make a deposit into your self-trust account. Every time you face a challenge and handle it, regardless of the outcome, you prove to yourself that you're capable of handling adversity. Every time you stay true to your values, despite pressure to compromise them, you strengthen your internal foundation. Every time you do these things, not just when you feel like it, not just when circumstances are favorable. Every time. The reverse is equally true and equally powerful. Every broken promise to yourself, every avoided challenge, every compromised value, every time fear stops you from taking action, makes a withdrawal from your self-trust account. And most people have been making withdrawals for years, sometimes decades, without making corresponding deposits. The result is what I call emotional bankruptcy, a deep, persistent inability to trust yourself, which drives the constant search for external validation to fill the gap. Other people's opinions, achievements, approval. All attempts to borrow confidence that can only actually be earned. Rebuilding real confidence requires a systematic, patient approach. Start absurdly small. This is not a figure of speech. Make a commitment to yourself, something genuinely small and genuinely specific, and follow through on it every day, without exception. It could be 15 minutes of exercise, 1 page of writing, a single cold call, 5 minutes of meditation. The size is irrelevant. The consistency is everything. Because what you're not actually building is a fitness habit or a writing practice. You're building evidence that you are someone who does what they say they're going to do. That evidence compounds. Each fulfilled commitment makes the next one slightly more natural. Your self-image shifts from someone who wants to change to someone who follows through. And once your identity shifts, the behaviors that align with that identity become self-sustaining rather than forced. Confidence also requires learning to process failure and setbacks as information rather than verdicts. Genuinely confident people don't fail less. They fail more because they attempt more, risk more, push further beyond the comfortable and familiar. What separates them is not the absence of failure. It's the speed and quality of their recovery. They don't need perfect outcomes to maintain their sense of capability. They need evidence that they can learn, adjust, and keep moving. That evidence is built one self-trust deposit at a time. There is no other way, and there is no shortcut. But when you build real confidence from the inside out, through consistent action aligned with your authentic values, it becomes truly unshakable. Because it's yours, no one can take it away by withdrawing their approval or outperforming you in some external metric. It lives in you, built by you, accountable only to you. That is the kind of confidence that changes lives. The compound effect, why small daily investments create extraordinary lives. Let me give you the single most counterintuitive insight in this entire book. The secret to extraordinary transformation is not intensity. It is consistency. This runs directly against everything our culture celebrates. We are surrounded by stories of dramatic breakthroughs, sudden awakenings, revolutionary pivots, before and after photos, radical 30-day transformations, the compelling narrative of the person who decided one day to change everything and did. These stories are not lies exactly, but they are dangerously incomplete because what they edit out is the months and years of small, consistent, unsexy daily investment that made the visible transformation possible. The compound effect, the principle that small actions taken consistently over time produce results that appear dramatically disproportionate to the individual actions, is not just a financial concept. It is the most powerful force for personal transformation that exists. And most people never experience it because they give up long before it becomes visible. Here's why they give up. They're measuring the wrong thing on the wrong timeline. They invest intensely for a few days or weeks, measure their results against the transformation they hope for, find the gap discouraging, and conclude that this doesn't work. They treat personal development like a vending machine. Insert sufficient effort, receive immediate result. That is not how human transformation works. Human transformation works like a forest. For months, sometimes years, almost nothing appears to be happening above the surface. The roots are spreading. The foundation is deepening. The system is building the infrastructure required to sustain genuine, lasting growth. And then, seemingly suddenly from the outside, something extraordinary breaks through. Let me make this concrete. Reading 10 pages of a genuinely valuable book every single day doesn't feel like much, but over a year that's more than 15 complete books, and an expansion of perspective, vocabulary, and cognitive capacity that would be impossible to acquire any other way. Investing 20 minutes in focused physical exercise daily doesn't seem significant. Over a year, that's more than 120 hours of physical conditioning and the cumulative neurological benefits that come with consistent movement, enhanced mood, improved focus, increased energy across every domain of life. Practicing any skill for 30 focused minutes daily doesn't appear to be serious investment. Over a year, that's more than 180 hours of deliberate practice, which, by most expert estimates, is enough to move from beginner to genuinely capable in almost any domain. The mathematics of consistency are simply extraordinary, but the psychological dimension of daily self-investment may be even more powerful than the practical. Identity-based change, the deep, lasting kind, happens not through willpower or forced behavior, but through the gradual accumulation of evidence that you are a certain kind of person. Every day you read, you strengthen the identity of someone who values continuous learning. Every day you exercise, you reinforce the identity of someone who prioritizes their health and energy. Every day you practice your craft, you deepen the identity of someone who takes mastery seriously. And once these identities are established, the behaviors that express them stop feeling like discipline. They start feeling like character. When you genuinely see yourself as someone who reads daily, deciding to read requires no willpower. It's just what you do. When you genuinely see yourself as someone who exercises, working out doesn't feel like resistance. It feels like alignment. The shift from "I'm trying to become this" to "I am this" is where real, lasting transformation lives. Daily self-investment also creates what I call multiplier returns, benefits that extend far beyond the specific area of focus. When you invest in reading, you're not just gaining information. You're improving your concentration, expanding your emotional vocabulary, developing your capacity for nuanced thinking, and building the habit of voluntary discomfort that transfers to every challenging endeavor in your life. When you invest in physical health, you're not just improving your body, you're regulating your nervous system, enhancing your cognitive performance, building discipline that extends to everything else, and creating a baseline of energy that makes every other investment more effective. The key is simply this: start small enough to be consistent and stay consistent long enough to compound. Dramatic beginnings almost always produce dramatic endings. Quiet, daily, non-negotiable commitments produce extraordinary lives. Criticism. Proof: building your armor against the noise. If you're serious about developing yourself, if you're genuinely committed to focusing on your own growth and building a life that's authentically yours, you need to understand something clearly before you go further. Criticism is not coming. It's already here. And once you start growing visibly, it will intensify. This is not pessimism. It's preparation. When you begin prioritizing yourself, when you start setting real boundaries, pursuing your authentic goals, saying no to obligations that don't serve your development, and showing up differently than you used to. Some of the people around you will experience this as a threat. Not because you're doing anything wrong, because growth is inherently disruptive to the people who were comfortable with the person you used to be. The criticism will come disguised as concern. "I'm worried you're becoming selfish. I just don't want to see you get hurt. You've changed, and I'm not sure it's a good thing. Are you sure about this? You seem different lately." Understand what's actually being communicated beneath the words. When someone tells you that focusing on yourself is selfish, they're usually saying, "Your self-focus threatens my access to your time and energy, and I want it back." When someone tells you your goals are unrealistic, they're usually saying, "Your ambition is uncomfortable for me because it highlights the ambition I've been afraid to act on." When someone warns you about the dangers of your chosen path, they're usually projecting their own fear of the unfamiliar onto your decisions. This is not malicious. It's deeply human. But understanding it changes your relationship with criticism entirely, from something destabilizing to something informative. Building genuine armor against criticism requires 4 components. Component 1: absolute internal clarity. When you are unambiguous about your values, your goals, and your reasons for the choices you're making, external criticism becomes far less threatening. You have an internal standard for evaluation that doesn't require external consensus. You can hear criticism, consider it honestly, and respond from a grounded place rather than a reactive one, because your foundation doesn't depend on anyone else's approval. Component 2: intelligent discernment. Not all criticism is equal. Learn to distinguish between constructive feedback and destructive criticism. Constructive feedback comes from people who genuinely support your growth. It's specific, actionable, and delivered with clear care for your well-being. It challenges you in ways that help you improve. This kind of feedback is worth seeking actively and receiving with genuine openness. Destructive criticism comes from people who want to diminish your efforts or relieve their own discomfort by undermining your direction. It's vague, personal, and delivered with underlying hostility or insecurity. This kind of criticism is worth examining briefly and dismissing efficiently. The ability to distinguish between the two, to remain genuinely open to the former while being resilient against the latter, is one of the most valuable social skills any growing person can develop. Component 3: internal locus of control. Develop your primary source of evaluation and worth as internal rather than external. Measure your decisions against your own values and goals rather than against other people's reactions. People with strong internal locus of control can hear criticism without being destabilized by it, consider it without being controlled by it, and maintain their direction without needing the consensus of those around them. Component 4: a growth-oriented community. Surround yourself with people who understand and genuinely support the commitment to personal development. not people who will validate everything you do. That's not support. That's flattery. People who share your values around growth, who want to see you succeed, and who provide alternative perspective and emotional grounding when the criticism from outside gets loud. But ultimately, the most powerful armor against criticism is the one that builds itself, your own results. When you consistently follow through on your commitments, when your skills demonstrably develop over time, when you create real value and achieve meaningful goals, the weight of criticism diminishes naturally, not because the critics disappear, but because objective reality increasingly contradicts their narrative. Keep showing up, keep building, keep becoming. The results will speak volumes that words never could. Execution mastery. The gap between knowing and actually doing. Here's a pattern that will sound familiar. You read something that genuinely changes how you think. You feel the insight land. You get energized. You make a plan, maybe even write it down. You feel the momentum of knowing exactly what you're going to do. And then, you don't do it. Or you do it for a few days, and then life interrupts, and the interrupt becomes the pattern. If this resonates, and for most people, it resonates deeply, you're not suffering from a lack of knowledge or a lack of desire. You're suffering from a lack of execution mastery. Execution mastery is not about working harder. Most people who struggle to execute are already working quite hard. They're just working on the wrong things, in the wrong sequence, in ways that don't leverage their actual psychology. True execution mastery is about developing the mental discipline to take the specific actions that directly move your most important goals forward, consistently, regardless of motivation levels, emotional states, or available distractions. The first component is priority ruthlessness. Most execution failures are not motivational, they're structural. People try to pursue too many goals simultaneously, fail to distinguish between what's urgent and what's truly important, and end up allowing low-priority activities to consume the time and energy that should be going toward high-impact actions. Priority ruthlessness means identifying, with clarity and commitment, the 3 to 5 outcomes that will most significantly advance your most important goals, and then organizing your entire schedule around making meaningful progress on those outcomes every day. Everything else gets a no matter how interesting, no matter how urgent, no matter how socially expected. This level of focus requires real courage because it means disappointing some people and missing some opportunities. But the alternative, spreading your attention across everything, means excelling at nothing. The second component is implementation systems. Willpower is a limited, unreliable resource. Motivation is a mood, not a method. If your execution strategy depends on consistently feeling ready, inspired, and motivated, you will be inconsistent. Execution masters design systems that produce consistent action, regardless of how they feel. These systems include specific daily routines that automatically move them toward their goals, environmental architecture that makes productive behaviors easier and unproductive behaviors harder, and accountability structures that create external accountability when internal motivation is insufficient. For example, if your goal is to write a book, don't wait for inspiration. Establish a specific daily writing window. Create a dedicated physical space for that work. Set a non-negotiable daily word target, however modest. Track your progress visually. Make the system so automatic that it operates independent of how you feel about writing on any given day. The third component is resistance management. Every meaningful goal involves activities that are uncomfortable, cognitively demanding, or simply boring. And your brain will continuously generate reasons not to do them, more urgent alternatives, sophisticated procrastination rationales, fears about inadequacy or judgment. Execution masters don't wait to stop feeling resistance. They've planned for its inevitability. They break challenging tasks into smaller components. They use time-based constraints. I will do this for 20 focused minutes to make the discomfort feel bounded and manageable. They connect their daily actions explicitly to their deeper motivations, especially on the days when immediate gratification seems more appealing than long-term progress. The fourth component is feedback optimization. Most people either avoid feedback because they fear criticism or receive feedback, but don't actually use it to adjust. Execution masters actively seek specific, honest, actionable feedback, and they treat every project as an iterative experiment rather than a fixed plan. They measure results consistently. They analyze what's working and what isn't. They refine their systems based on what they learn. They treat setbacks not as evidence of failure, but as data that improves their approach. The fifth component is momentum maintenance. The most common execution pattern is bursts of intense activity, followed by extended inactivity, followed by the need to rebuild from scratch. This creates a Sisyphean experience where you're always overcoming initial resistance rather than building on existing momentum. Execution masters protect momentum like a strategic asset. They maintain some level of daily action on their most important goals, even in small form, even during periods of low energy or challenging circumstances, because they understand a simple truth. Something, however small, is infinitely better than nothing, because it preserves the momentum that makes returning to full intensity exponentially easier. The gap between dreamers and achievers is almost never talent. It is execution mastery. And execution mastery, like all genuine skills, is built through deliberate practice, intelligent structure, and the daily decision to act, regardless of what it feels like. The relationship revolution. How self-development transforms every connection. Here's something that catches most people completely off guard when they begin seriously working on themselves. The quality of your relationships doesn't stay the same as you grow. It bifurcates. Some relationships improve dramatically, deepening, becoming more honest, more reciprocal, more genuinely satisfying than they've ever been. Others reveal themselves to be fundamentally incompatible with the person you're becoming, and they naturally begin to dissolve. This is not a side effect of growth. It is a feature, an essential, healthy, and ultimately beautiful feature of genuine personal development. Most people fear this bifurcation intensely because it means facing the possibility of losing familiar connections. And that fear keeps them small. It keeps them performing outdated versions of themselves to maintain relationships that were built on who they used to be. But here's what you need to understand. Low-quality relationships are not better than no relationships. They are worse. Staying connected to people who drain your energy, disrespect your boundaries, require you to suppress your authentic self, or actively discourage your growth is not loyalty. It is not love. It is self-abandonment, and it prevents the development of the genuine connection that actually becomes available when you're operating as your real self. As you develop real confidence, genuine self-respect, and clear boundaries, you naturally become less available for relationships that required your old patterns. You stop tolerating disrespect because you've built actual self-respect. You stop accepting minimal effort because you've developed a grounded sense of your own worth. You stop functioning as everyone's emotional rescuer because you've shifted your focus to your own growth. This will trigger reactions. Count on it. The friend who was accustomed to unlimited emotional access will call you selfish when you're no longer on call. The partner who was comfortable with an unequal dynamic will feel threatened when you start expecting mutuality. The family member who relied on your compliance will escalate when your boundaries become real and consistent. These reactions are not evidence that you're doing something wrong. They are evidence that you were previously in unhealthy dynamics and that your growth is disrupting patterns that were not serving you. The people who genuinely care about you will adapt. They may need time. They may experience discomfort. But they will ultimately respect your development because they care about you as a person, not just as a function you were performing. The people who only cared about you in your previous, smaller form will reveal that truth through their resistance. Both outcomes are valuable information. The relationship revolution also involves actively attracting an entirely new caliber of connection. When you operate from genuine self-respect, authentic confidence, and clear values, you become visible to people who share those qualities. You start connecting with people who have their own goals and passions, who can contribute genuine value to your life rather than simply extracting from it, who celebrate your growth because it reflects the values they live by. These relationships feel qualitatively different from anything you may have experienced before. Less drama, more depth, less performance, more authenticity, less management, more genuine mutual investment. But attracting relationships of this quality requires one non-negotiable condition. You must become the kind of person you want to attract. You cannot expect qualities from others that you don't demonstrate yourself. You cannot attract emotional maturity if you haven't done your own emotional work. You cannot draw people with clear values if you haven't clarified your own. This is the deepest reason why focusing on yourself is not selfish when it comes to relationships. It is essential. The better you become, the better the connections available to you. The more genuinely interesting, capable, and self-aware you are, the more interesting, capable, and self-aware the people who are drawn to you. Your investment in yourself is ultimately an investment in every relationship you will ever have. The mental fortress, becoming psychologically indestructible. The quality that most consistently separates people who achieve extraordinary things from people who collapse under pressure is not talent, resources, or favorable circumstances. It is mental resilience, the capacity to maintain focus, internal stability, and forward momentum regardless of setbacks, criticism, failure, or external chaos. Most people have minds that shatter under real pressure. Not because they're weak people, but because they've never deliberately built psychological strength. They've never taken their mental resilience seriously enough to work on it the way an athlete works on their physical conditioning. But you can build a mental fortress, and it is one of the most consequential investments you will ever make. The fortress is built on 5 pillars. Pillar 1, perspective mastery. The most common psychological trap is losing context, allowing an immediate challenge to fill your entire field of vision until it feels all-consuming and permanent. Perspective mastery is the ability to zoom out, to hold current difficulties alongside the longer arc of your life, your trajectory, and the full scope of what you're building. This doesn't mean minimizing genuine difficulty. It means refusing to let temporary circumstances define a permanent narrative. Every significant person in history has faced failure, rejection, and extended periods of doubt. What distinguished them from those who quit was their capacity to maintain perspective, to hold difficulty as a chapter rather than as the whole story. Pillar 2, emotional regulation mastery. Most people's actions are determined by their emotional state. When they feel motivated, they work. When they feel discouraged, they stop. When they feel anxious, they avoid. When they feel angry, they decide. This makes behavior unpredictable, inconsistent, and ultimately undermines any strategy for sustained achievement. Emotional regulation mastery means developing the capacity to acknowledge your emotional state without being controlled by it, to feel the discouragement, the anxiety, the frustration, and take the necessary action anyway, not by suppressing emotions, which is simply another form of dysfunction. By developing the ability to hold feelings with sufficient detachment that they inform rather than dictate your choices. Pillar 3. Meaning-making mastery. Humans are meaning-making organisms. We cannot experience neutral events. We assign interpretations to everything. And those interpretations determine our experience of what happens more profoundly than the events themselves. The same business failure becomes either proof that I don't have what it takes, or valuable information that will make my next attempt significantly stronger. The same criticism becomes either a verdict on your worth or a data point to consider. The same obstacle becomes either evidence to quit or an opportunity to develop a capability you didn't have before. Mastering the meanings you assign to your experiences is one of the highest leverage psychological skills available. Pillar 4. Narrative control. Beneath your conscious thoughts, there is a story you're telling yourself about who you are, what's possible for you, and what your circumstances mean. Most people are completely unconscious of this narrative, and yet it is directing their behavior, their decisions, and their sense of what they can attempt. Narrative control means becoming conscious of the story running in the background and deliberately choosing one that empowers forward action, not a delusional story, not toxic positivity. A story that is accurate about difficulty while remaining committed to possibility. One that acknowledges real challenges while maintaining a clear-eyed orientation toward your capacity to navigate them. Pillar 5. Stress inoculation. Physical immune systems don't get stronger through protection from all pathogens. They get stronger through calibrated, manageable exposure that builds adaptive capacity. Mental resilience works identically. The people with the strongest psychological fortresses are not those who avoided difficulty. They're those who deliberately pursued progressively challenging experience, difficult conversations, ambitious projects, goals that required operating well outside their comfort zone, and built strength through each successful navigation. Each challenge you deliberately pursue and successfully navigate becomes evidence you can draw on in the next, harder situation. Deliberately seek hard things. Not destructively hard. Productively hard. At the edge of your current capacity, where real growth happens. That edge is where the fortress is built. Reality creation. Taking complete ownership of your experience. There is a belief that is quietly responsible for more unfulfilled potential and preventable suffering than almost any other in human experience. The belief that life happens to you, that your circumstances are primarily determined by forces outside your control, that your role is to react as well as possible to whatever situations arise, that the trajectory of your life is mostly a function of luck, timing, and the decisions of other people. This belief is not just inaccurate, it is the precise mechanism that keeps people trapped, because if life happens to you, then you're powerless. And powerless people don't create change. They manage circumstances. The truth is more demanding and infinitely more liberating. Your external reality is largely a reflection of your internal reality. Not entirely. Not in some magical instant manifestation sense, but substantially, reliably, and in ways that become impossible to ignore once you start paying honest attention. Your circumstances reflect your standards. Your relationships reflect your patterns. Your opportunities reflect your preparation. Your results reflect your habits, decisions, and the quality of attention you're bringing to your life. This is not comfortable to acknowledge, Because it dismantles the most socially acceptable coping mechanism available: blame. Blame is comfortable because it relocates responsibility for your life onto factors you can't change: the economy, your childhood, your circumstances, other people's choices. And as long as those external factors are responsible for your current reality, you're not required to do the difficult internal work of changing. But the moment you accept genuine responsibility for your role in creating your current circumstances, something extraordinary becomes possible. You can use that same creative power to build different circumstances. Reality creation operates through 5 principles. Principle 1. Environmental design. Your physical environment, digital environment, and social environment shape your behavior, thoughts, and emotional baseline far more powerfully than most people acknowledge. Consciously designing these environments, your physical space, the information you consume, the people you're regularly around, creates the conditions that support who you're becoming, rather than who you've been. Principle 2. Relationship curation. The people who have consistent access to your time and attention have enormous influence on your standards, beliefs, energy, and sense of possibility. Curating these relationships, intentionally and without apology, is one of the most high-leverage investments you can make in your trajectory. Principle 3. Opportunity creation. Exceptional opportunities are rarely stumbled into. They are built through preparation, positioning, skill development, and proactive relationship investment. The people who appear to be consistently lucky are typically the people who have prepared most thoroughly to recognize and capitalize on the possibilities that others either miss or aren't ready for. Principle 4. Feedback optimization. Consistently measuring your results and using that data to refine your approach is the mechanism through which strategy improves. This requires genuine intellectual honesty, the willingness to acknowledge what isn't working and adjust, regardless of how invested you are in the original plan. Principle 5. Compound leverage. Identify the activities, skills, and relationships that create disproportionate returns across multiple domains of your life, and invest in them systematically over extended periods. Strong communication skills create leverage in every professional and personal context. Deep emotional intelligence improves every relationship and decision. A carefully built network of genuine relationships opens doors that individual effort alone cannot reach. Reality creation is not wishful thinking or mystical attraction. It is the systematic application of honest self-awareness, strategic action, and compound investment to the factors that most powerfully influence your outcomes. It starts with the willingness to take full, honest, undefended responsibility for your life as it currently is, and it accelerates with every conscious, well-considered decision you make from that foundation. The unstoppable you. The transformation that makes you legendary. You've arrived at the point where everything changes. Not because you've collected more information, not because you've encountered a technique you haven't seen before, but because across 14 chapters, through every principle and every framework, the same foundational truth has been building toward one single, defining understanding. You are not fixed. You are not finished. And who you become from this moment forward is entirely, completely, non-negotiably within your power. Most people never genuinely grasp this. They believe at some level that who they are is who they'll be. That personality is permanent. That capability is mostly inherited. That circumstances are primarily determined by forces beyond their control. And so they live inside those assumptions, unconsciously for their entire lives. But you now know differently. Identity is fluid. Capabilities are developed. Circumstances respond, Not perfectly, not instantly, but substantially and reliably to the quality of choices, actions, and internal work you bring to your life. The transformation begins with a decision that most people never quite make. Not the decision to try harder, not the decision to implement a better strategy, but the decision to take complete responsibility for your own development, happiness, and outcomes. Not partially responsible, not responsible when it's convenient or when circumstances are favorable, completely and permanently responsible. This decision eliminates all external excuses, and in doing so, eliminates the primary mechanism that has been keeping you exactly where you are. And here's what I can promise you about what happens after that decision. The transformation becomes unstoppable, not because it's effortless, but because the process itself generates momentum that compounds over time in ways that are genuinely impossible to predict from where you're standing now. Each improvement creates the foundation for the next improvement. Each challenge successfully navigated expands your sense of what you're capable of. Each day you prioritize your development over the path of least resistance. You strengthen the identity of someone who doesn't settle for circumstances, for relationships, for a version of themselves that is less than what's possible. The transformation is also unstoppable because it operates at the identity level rather than just the behavioral level. You are not simply acting differently while remaining the same person underneath. You are actually becoming a different person. Someone who naturally thinks, responds, and moves through the world in alignment with their highest potential. Someone for whom the behaviors that once required enormous discipline now simply feel like character. This shift cannot be undone. Once you've genuinely changed who you are at the identity level, there is no returning to the previous version, but you need to know what's coming. The moment you commit, genuinely, fully, without reservations, to becoming the most powerful version of yourself, your environment will test that commitment. People who were comfortable with the previous version of you will express discomfort with the new one. Circumstances will arise that seem specifically designed to pull you back to familiar patterns. Your own psychology will generate fear, doubt, and resistance, designed to protect the safety of the known. These tests are not obstacles. They are graduation exams. Every time you maintain your boundaries despite social pressure, you pass. Every time you continue pursuing your goals despite setbacks and criticism, you pass. Every time you choose long-term growth over the immediate comfort of retreat, you pass. And each passing makes the next test slightly less formidable, because your identity as someone who chooses growth over comfort is strengthening with every repetition. The legendary level. The level this entire book has been building toward is reached when external circumstances lose their power to dictate your internal state. When you can maintain focus in the midst of chaos, confidence in the face of sustained criticism, momentum through repeated setbacks, creativity in constrained circumstances. When you become the person who creates value regardless of environment, who inspires through example rather than instruction, who approaches the next challenge with interest rather than dread, because you've developed sufficient evidence of your own resilience that challenges feel like opportunities rather than threats. That is the legendary level. And it is not reserved for the specially gifted, the fortunately born, or the cosmically lucky. It is built day by day, choice by choice. Self-trust, deposit by self-trust, deposit. What's required is not talent. What's required is obsessive consistency, the willingness to show up, especially when it's inconvenient, to stay focused, especially when motivation is absent, to do the work, especially when it's difficult. to maintain your standards, especially when the path of least resistance is immediately available and deeply tempting. Because character, real character, is not revealed when everything is easy. It's revealed when everything is hard. One more thing, and perhaps the most important. Your transformation is not just for you. Every person who observes your journey, who watches you move from stuck and uncertain to genuinely confident and purposeful, receives something they may not be able to articulate, but will absolutely feel. Proof that transformation is possible. Your growth expands what other people believe is available to them. Your example becomes evidence that the life they secretly want is not a fantasy. It's a decision and a discipline away. Your investment in yourself ultimately becomes one of the most generous contributions you could possibly make to the people around you. This is why focusing on yourself is not selfish. It is the most profound, most far-reaching act of service available to you. You have always had this power. Now you understand how to use it. Start today. Right now. Not when the conditions are perfect, not when you feel ready, not when the timing is ideal. Now. The version of you that is possible on the other side of this commitment is waiting. And every day you delay is a day that version remains unreached. The choice is yours. It has always been yours. Choose wisely. Choose boldly. Choose yourself.